the cruelty didn't come from a stranger. It came from the woman my daughter had chosen to call her second mother, standing in my own backyard with a glass of my own wine in her hand. I was sitting in the cedar Muskoka chair my late husband built, watching the string lights sway over the deck, when her voice cut through the August evening like a blade through butter. "Let's be honest," she said, loud enough that the conversation near the barbecue stopped dead. "You didn't raise a daughter. You raised yourself a meal ticket and got lucky. She turned out generous. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I have been called a lot of things in 71 years. I was called slow by a grade school teacher in Sudbury who didn't know I couldn't see the chalkboard. I was called difficult by a foreman at the plant in Hamilton when I asked for the same wage as the man beside me. I have been underestimated my whole life, and I learned a long time ago to let it roll off. But that sentence in my own backyard at the party meant to celebrate my granddaughter's acceptance to the University of Toronto. That one landed somewhere I couldn't shrug it off, and then came the part that truly stopped my breath. My daughter laughed, not a nervous laugh, not the kind you let out when you don't know what else to do with your hands. It was a short, easy laugh, the kind shared between two people who've rehearsed a joke before. It came out of her like she'd been waiting for permission. And in that small sound, I understood that whatever this was, it wasn't a single moment of bad manners. It was an agreement, something the two of them had decided about me long before tonight, and they had simply found the right evening to say it out loud. Tell me where you're watching from, because I promise you, what happened over the next 3 weeks is not what you'd expect from a woman my age. I didn't shout. I didn't cry in front of them. I want you to remember that. My grandson set down his pop can. He was 24 that summer, finishing his last year of his apprenticeship as a millwright. Broad in the shoulders the way his grandfather had been, slow to anger the way I'd hoped to raise his mother to be. He stood up from the picnic table without rushing, the way you'd stand if you'd just remembered you left the truck running. The lights caught the side of his face, and I watched something settle there. Not rage. Clarity. A cold, quiet clarity that scared me more than any temper ever could. "What's funny, Mom?" he asked. My daughter's smile cracked at the edges. The woman beside her, her partner's mother, the one who'd thrown the insult, looked around the deck as if the applause she expected hadn't arrived. Somebody's fork clinked against a plate. A neighbor 2 yards over kept laughing at something on his own deck, oblivious, and the contrast made the silence among us feel even heavier. "It's a joke, sweetheart," my daughter said. "Don't make it a thing." "You laughed," my grandson said. His voice didn't rise. If anything, it dropped, the way his grandfathers used to before he said something he meant. "You stood in Grandma's backyard, in the house she paid off scrubbing floors at the General, and you laughed when somebody called her a meal ticket." He looked at the other woman then, the second mother, with a steadiness that made her set her wine down on the railing. In her own home, at a party for my sister, nobody said anything. The string lights swayed. Somewhere down the street, a kid was riding a bike with a baseball card, clothespin to the spokes, that whirring sound, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the world kept making its ordinary noises while mine tilted on its side. I sat very still. I kept my hands folded in my lap. My name is Eleanor Voss, and the only person in that backyard who knew the full weight of that name was the young man standing up for me because I had told him things over the years that I had never told his mother, not out of secrecy, out of the simple fact that he asked, and she never did. "Connor, sit down," my daughter said. "You're embarrassing yourself." "No," he said. "I think I finally understand something." And he picked his jacket off the back of the chair the same way you'd pick up a decision you'd been putting off. And he said, "I'm not staying for this." And he walked across the lawn toward the side gate. And I heard the latch And then his truck door, and then the engine, and the party, such as it was over. People made their excuses fast after that, the way folks do when shame is in the air and they don't want it sticking to them on the way out. The second mother gathered her things and left without a word to me, which I'll admit I preferred. My daughter stayed long enough to scrape plates into the green bin and tell me with her back to me that I'd always known how to make everything about myself. Then she left too, and I stood in my own kitchen at 11 o'clock at night washing wine glasses by hand because I didn't trust myself to load the dishwasher without breaking one. I want to back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand how a person ends up a stranger at her own daughter's table. I had my daughter late by the standards of my generation. I was 38, and her father, my husband David, was 41, and we'd long given up the idea that we'd have a child at all. When she came, we treated her like the miracle we genuinely believed she was. Maybe that was the first mistake, though I've never been able to bring myself to fully regret it. We gave her everything we'd never had. David worked the line at the steel plant, and I cleaned at the hospital, nights mostly. And between the two of us, we put her through her undergrad at McMaster and then her law degree at Western, without her ever taking on $1 of debt. I remember the day she was called to the bar. I wore a dress I'd bought at Value Village and tailored myself, and I sat in that gallery in London, Ontario, and I cried so hard a stranger handed me a Kleenex. I had cleaned other people's messes for 30 years so that my girl would never have to. She married a decent enough man, and they had my granddaughter and then my grandson, and for a while we were close. Then David died. A heart attack on a Tuesday morning while shoveling the driveway, the most ordinary Canadian death there is, and something in our family rearranged itself in his absence that I didn't notice happening until it was done. His partner's mother, the woman from the backyard, came into the picture around then. Her name was Patricia, and she was a retired real estate agent from Oakville, with a way of filling a room that left no oxygen for anyone else. She had money, the comfortable kind, and she had opinions about everything from drapery to discipline. And my daughter, grieving her own father and overwhelmed with 2 kids and a practice, latched onto her like a life raft. I understood it, even. Patricia was available in a way I couldn't always be. I was still working part-time at 7D, still picking up shifts, because the truth nobody likes to say out loud is that a hospital cleaner's pension does not stretch far in this country anymore. But here is the part that matters, the part Patricia never knew and my daughter chose to forget. When David died, he left a life insurance policy. $240,000. We had paid into it for 30 years, the both of us, going without so the premiums stayed current. And I did not keep it. I sat down with my daughter at her kitchen table 8 years ago, and I signed nearly all of it over, toward the down payment on the bigger house in Burlington, toward the kids' RESPs, toward the line of credit they used to renovate the practice. I kept enough to bury David properly and to keep my own small bungalow in Hamilton, and I gave the rest to my girl because that is what David would have wanted, and because I have never in my life been able to hold money in a closed fist when my child needed it. I never told Patricia that. I never told my granddaughter or grandson, though Connor, my grandson, eventually figured pieces of it out on his own, the way quiet, observant young men do. So when Patricia stood in my backyard and called me a meal ticket, when she said my daughter was the one carrying me, she had the entire thing upside down, and my daughter, who knew the truth, who had signed those papers and watched me push them across the table, said nothing. She laughed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in David's old recliner with the lamp on and a cup of tea going cold, and I thought about the 17 years of small surrenders that had led to a woman in my backyard feeling free to humiliate me. The Christmases I'd hosted that became Christmases at Patricia's because the house is bigger. The grandkids' birthdays I'd find out about from photos posted online. The way my opinions on anything had become, over time, something to be managed rather than heard. I had let it happen one small concession at a time, telling myself each one was the price of keeping the peace, the price of staying in their lives, and I'd ended up barely in their lives at all, sitting in my own backyard like a guest who'd overstayed. Connor came by the next morning. I heard his truck before I saw it, that particular rattle in the muffler I kept offering to pay to fix, that he kept refusing. He sat at my kitchen table with his work boots still on, which David never would have allowed, and which I let slide because the boy looked like he hadn't slept either. "Grandma," he said, "I have to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, because I've been doing math in my head all night, and it isn't adding up." So I told him. All of it. The policy, the down payment, the RASPs, the line of credit, the years of shifts I was still working at an age when I should have been done. I hadn't planned to. I'd carried it like a private thing for so long it felt strange to set it down. But he asked, and he was the only one who ever did, so I told him. He was quiet for a long time. He turned his coffee mug in a slow circle on the table. "The renovation on the practice," he finally said. "The one Mom's always going on about. The new house, the whole life they show off to Patricia's friends." He looked up at me. "You built that, and they let that woman stand in your yard and call you a freeloader." "Connor," I started. "And you said nothing," he said. "Not accusing, just laying it out, the way you lay tools on a bench before a job. For 8 years you said nothing. I didn't want to be a burden, I said, and I heard how thin it sounded the moment it left me." He nodded slowly. Then he said the thing I'll never forget. "Grandma, there's a difference between being humble and letting people rewrite who you are. You being quiet didn't make them kinder. It just made them braver." I'd love to tell you I had a grand response to that. I didn't. I cried at my own kitchen table while my grandson held my hand, and for the first time in 8 years, I let myself feel the full size of what I'd given away and not just the money. Now, I want to be clear about what happened next, because this is the part people get wrong when they hear the story secondhand. My grandson did not go on a rampage. He did not scream at his mother or post anything online or make a scene. What he did was quieter than that and far heavier. He had, the previous spring, taken a job offer that mattered to my daughter and her partner more than they'd admit. Connor was good, genuinely good, and a contractor he'd apprenticed under had brought him in on a new commercial build downtown, the kind of project that pays well and leads to more. My daughter's partner ran a small engineering consultancy, the kind that lives and dies on referrals, and Connor had been quietly steering work his way for 2 years. The renovation, the connections, a chunk of the consultancy's recent contracts, they traced back through my grandson to people who trusted him. Patricia loved to talk at parties about her son-in-law's booming firm. She never asked where the bookings came from. Connor stopped steering the work. That was the first thing. Not out of spite, he told me. Out of clarity. I can't keep building something for people who'll let you be torn down at the same table, he said. The second thing was the house. When my daughter and her partner had bought the place in Burlington, they'd done it partly on a private loan, paper I had signed, because the bank wanted more security, and I had a paid-off bungalow and a stubborn willingness to put my name behind my child. For 8 years, I'd carried a portion of that risk silently, and they'd treated it as if it had never existed. My grandson, who works with numbers more than people think a tradesman does, sat with me and a lawyer in St. Thinky, Catherine's, and helped me understand something I'd never let myself look at. I had rights here, not vengeance. Rights. The arrangement could be unwound. The portion I carried could be called in or transferred, properly, legally, with notice. I didn't do it to ruin anyone. I want that on the record. I did it to stop pretending I was nobody. The letters went out the following week. Nothing cruel. A formal notice from a lawyer that I would be restructuring my financial involvement, that the private loan arrangement would need to be addressed, that my name would be coming off the obligations I'd been silently securing for the better part of a decade. To anyone reading it cold, it was just paperwork. To my daughter, it landed like the floor opening up, because for the first time, she had to look directly at how much of her comfortable life had been standing on her mother's back. I heard about the days that followed in pieces, the way you always do. Some from Connor, some much later from my daughter herself, and the hardest part straight from Patricia when she finally came and sat across from me with nothing left to hide behind. The private loan notice hit first. My daughter's partner opened it on a Tuesday and read it 3 times before he understood that the cushion he'd assumed was his had a name on it, and the name was mine. Then the work slowed. A referral that should have come didn't. A contract they'd counted on went to a competing firm. Nothing dramatic enough to point to, just the quiet withdrawal of a current that had been carrying them so long they'd mistaken it for their own swimming. According to what my daughter told me much later, there was a night the 2 of them sat at that big island in the Burlington kitchen, the one I helped pay for, going over numbers, and her partner turned to her and said, "I thought your mother had nothing." And my daughter, to her credit, did not lie to him. She said, "I let everyone think that." Patricia, of course, took it the worst, because Patricia had built her entire sense of standing on being the family's woman of means, the generous one, the one who knew which fork to use and which charity gala to attend. When the loan structure came apart and her son-in-law's firm started to feel the draft, she did what people like Patricia do. She looked for someone to blame, and she pointed at me, the bitter old woman causing trouble. Right up until my granddaughter, the one whose party had started the whole thing, the young woman heading to U of T, sat her whole family down and said the words none of them had been willing to say. "Grandma paid for the house," she said. "Grandma paid for our schooling. I found the papers in Mom's office looking for my immunization records. Grandma has been carrying us this whole time, and you called her a meal ticket and Mom laughed." That silenced even Patricia. Here is where the story turns, and it's the turn I'm proudest of, because it's the one Connor made me promise to honor. My granddaughter had done nothing wrong. She'd been horrified at that party, I learned later. She'd left in tears, and I'd been too wrapped in my own hurt to notice. And her respart, the education fund David's money had quietly grown for 18 years, came up in those lawyers' meetings as something I had every right to redirect. I could have. Lord knows there was a small, sharp part of me that wanted to make all of them feel the cold at once. I didn't touch it. She kept her mouth shut at the party because she was 22 and terrified, Connor said. She wasn't laughing, Grandma. She was the only one who came and checked on you the next day. And he was right. She had. A quiet text the morning after that. I'd been too raw to answer. So I left her fund exactly where it was, fully intact, and I had the lawyer send her one line in with all the cold paperwork. Your education is not a bargaining chip. It was paid for in love, and it stays. Go to Toronto, make your grandfather proud. She called me crying. We talked for an hour. It was the first real conversation I'd had with anyone in that family in years. It was Patricia who came to me first, which surprised me. She showed up at my bungalow on a gray October afternoon. No makeup, none of the jewelry, in a raincoat that had seen better seasons. She sat at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she didn't drink, and her hands shook. "I told everyone I was the one holding this family up," she said. Her voice had lost all its boardroom polish. "The parties, the connections. I never once stopped to ask who was actually holding the floor we were all standing on." She looked at me, and there were tears she didn't perform, just let sit there. "It was you. The whole time it was you, and I called you a freeloader in your own backyard." I didn't make it easy on her. I'm not a saint, and I'd spent 8 years being agreeable. But I didn't throw her out either. I let her say what she came to say, and when she was done, I told her the only thing I had left to give her, which was the truth. "You didn't ruin this family, Patricia," I said. "You just said out loud what my own daughter let herself believe in silence. That's the part I have to live with. My daughter took the longest. Months. She'd lost the easy life, some of the social standing, the comfortable assumption that I'd always be there to catch the fall. When she finally came, she didn't bring an excuse, which was new for her. She sat where Patricia had sat and she said, 'I knew the truth and I let her say that to you.' And I laughed because some sick part of me had decided that if I made you small, I wouldn't have to feel how much I owed you." She put her head down on my kitchen table like she was a girl again. "I'm sorry, Mom. Not for the money, for the laugh." I forgave her, not all at once, and not the way the movies do it. Forgiveness, when you're 71, isn't a door swinging open. It's a window you leave cracked a little more each season. We are slowly, carefully, becoming something again, not what we were, something more honest. The reason I can tell you all of this now is that last month my granddaughter graduated from U of T and they held the ceremony at Convocation Hall, that great domed room downtown, and she had 4 tickets and she gave me one of them. Front row of the family section, she'd arranged it herself. When she crossed that stage and they read her name, I was on my feet before I knew I'd stood. And afterward, at the little reception, she pulled me up beside her in front of her friends and their parents, this whole crowd of polished families, and she said, loud enough for the room, "This is my grandmother. Everything I have because she cleaned hospital floors for 30 years and never once let me feel the cost of it." And she kissed my cheek the way Connor does, the way David used to, and I let myself cry in front of strangers, and there was no shame in it at all. Patricia was there, near the back, clapping. When our eyes met across that room, she gave me a small nod, not asking for anything, just acknowledging a truth we'd both finally agreed on. I went home to my little bungalow that night, the one I never let them talk me out of, and I sat in David's recliner with the lamp on, and a cup of tea I actually drank while it was hot. They'd spent years deciding I was the one being carried. They mistook my quiet for emptiness, my giving for weakness, my whole life for a debt they could write off with a single cruel sentence in my own backyard. They underestimated what it means to be a mother, and it turned out that was the very thing standing under everything they'd built. For 8 years, I told myself that staying quiet was the kind thing to do. I sat in that backyard letting Patricia rewrite my whole life into a sentence. And I let my own daughter laugh, and I called it keeping the peace. But peace built on your own silence isn't peace. It's just a slow surrender you've agreed to pay in installments. I learned that at 71, far later than I'd have liked, and I want to leave it somewhere it might do some good. Here is the thing about cause and effect that took me most of my life to understand. Nothing that happened to my family fell out of the sky. Patricia felt free to call me a meal ticket because for years I had taught everyone, by my own quiet, that I would absorb whatever was said. My daughter laughed because I had let small disrespects pass so often that contempt had room to grow into a habit. And when Connor finally stood up, when the loan came apart and the easy life wobbled, none of that was punishment falling from nowhere either. It was simply the truth arriving at the door it had always been heading toward. Actions sit quietly for years, and then one August evening they all come due at once. What I'd want my granddaughter to carry from this is simpler than it sounds. Be a person of decency. The kind who gives without keeping score, but never confuse decency with letting yourself be erased. I gave David's insurance money freely, and I would do it again. The mistake was not the giving. The mistake was letting people believe the giving cost me nothing, that I was a woman with nothing to lose. Generosity should make you bigger in a room, not smaller. And use your head the way Connor used his. He didn't shout or shame anyone online. He sat at my table with a coffee mug turning slow circles, and he did the math. He saw the structure underneath the feelings and he understood that clarity is its own kind of strength. Anger makes noise. Thinking makes change. He read the situation, found where the truth actually lived in the paperwork, and let it speak for itself. Most of all, find your backbone before you need it. The hardest thing I did was not signing those lawyers' letters. It was deciding, after 8 years of folding, that I was still someone worth standing up for. That took more out of me than 30 years of night shifts at the General ever did. Strength isn't roaring. Sometimes it's a tired old woman in a cedar chair deciding she will not be made small in her own home one more time. I forgave my daughter and Patricia, and I left my granddaughter's fund untouched because she'd done nothing but be young and frightened. Forgiveness, it turns out, isn't going back to how things were. It's refusing to carry the weight forward. I put mine down. I drink my tea hot now, and I have never once regretted finally being seen.